Okay, so welcome everybody to our Monday workshop. And this evening we have with us, or today, wherever you are in the world, morning, evening, today we have with us again for this wonderful series, Dr. Samantha Duggan. Samantha is a behavioral psychologist with a background in addiction recovery, working in private practice with parents on family and parenting issues. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. And in this workshop, Samantha will be covering the vital importance of understanding how innate temperament, both ours and our children's, can be harnessed so as to prevent traumatic ruptures in the family and to heal and repair them when they inevitably happen. So details about the final workshop in this series, which will be next month. So Samantha, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for all your generosity in doing these for us. Really appreciate you. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, everybody. Hello, good evening. Well, evening where I am anyway, in the UK. I know some of you have heard me before. I'm delighted to be back. Thank you for asking me. But I also know that some of you may be joining for the first time. So I'll just very quickly introduce myself. My name is Samantha. I am a psychologist and a person in recovery. I've done that with the help of 4 main 12-step fellowships. I also have helped to co-found a charity called Visible Recovery. In the UK, we are passionate advocates for making recovery more visible in our society because, well, I believe that if we are open, a little bit more open anyway, about our experiences, then we can reduce stigma that way and increase understanding. Often lack of understanding is frequently what drives stigma, it seems to me. So I'm very honored to be speaking to you here today about these 3 intertwined topics that are really about my private practice work, and they have immense import for me, both personally and professionally. So childhood temperament, it's this idea that we all children are born with a temperament, and if we understand or indeed fail to understand it, we will shape a child's emotional development for better or worse, laying the groundwork for either some childhood trauma and perhaps even later diagnoses of mental health disorders, or we can work to lay the groundwork for an ever-increasing emotional maturity in our children and ability to emotionally regulate themselves. And I mean, in the ideal scenario, we would see that happening in line with our children's physical maturity. But I know from personal experience, and I may share a story or two, that it's never too late to develop greater emotional maturity. So here is, I'm going to show you a map of my talk tonight, or an outline really. So the first part of the talk, I'm hoping about somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. I want to lay the overview of temperament, trauma, emotional sobriety, touch on this concept of misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis that I think is of increasing concern to psychologists, psychiatrists today. I am going to give you a brief introduction to how adult personality and childhood temperament are linked, and just provide a little bit of an academic research underpinning for the talk. But then I'm hoping to spend the bulk of the talk on this deep dive into Thomas and Chess's 9 temperamental traits and Mary Sheedy Kurcinka's concept of the spirited child. So the 9 traits, or temperamental traits, are listed there. You'll see things like sensitivity, mood, activity level. I've put them up there for anybody who likes to know in advance what's coming, but don't worry, we're going to spend a lot more time with those in the second, deeper part of the talk. So if I can just set the scene, as I said, I'm going to be focusing on that groundbreaking work of 2 American MDs, Thomas and Chess. Their research into childhood temperament has had a lasting impact on how we understand the emotional landscape of children. So temperament, as they describe it, this slide is showing some definitions of terms that I will use throughout the talk. So these are biological, inborn, born with them traits that children can be measured from shortly after birth. Some of them I'll tell you ones which there is definite evidence that they are measurable from birth, and they make up a child's behavioral style. But before we go into detail about that, I want to frame the conversation with a couple of other important ideas. It's this idea that parents, grandparents, caregivers, teachers, educators, when we don't understand and acknowledge a child's temperament, we may unintentionally cause harm. Now, causing harm is something that we all do to each other all the time. There's no biggie really about that. We fall out with each other and we can make up as long as we have the skills to do so. And when we experience disappointments and losses and hurts, then we can work to repair those things. And parents who have done their own work of becoming emotionally regulated, perhaps parents who are in recovery, often can become really good at that kind of thing. But there is no doubt, I think, that misunderstanding around temperament can lead parents who don't know otherwise to seek out a diagnosis for behavior in their children that they just can't understand. And I want to caution against rushing to pathologize what may in fact be normal aspects of a child's temperament with conditions like autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Because if we speak about another foundational element of my talk tonight, this idea of emotional sobriety, which I know we're big on in this group here. So in recovery circles, emotional sobriety tends to be used to refer to the ability to stay emotionally grounded, present in the moment, choosing rather than reacting, responding rather than reacting, even when we're filled with difficult feelings ourselves, even when we're confronted by very challenging behavior on the part of other people. So it's about managing our behaviors and our feelings in a mature and regulated way. And I think it's obvious how that is essential, not just for our own well-being, but also for encouraging the well-being of our children. Ultimately, raising emotionally mature children starts with cultivating emotional maturity in ourselves. So if we presently lack emotional sobriety, or we have maybe a little bit of a deficit or a shortcoming in it, due to our own unresolved or unprocessed trauma or our own unhealthy patterns of behavior, perhaps some people here tonight might be quite new in recovery and starting to discover that they have some unhealthy patterns of behavior. Don't worry, they can be learned. We can all learn new ones. But until we have learned new behaviors, there's no doubt that we can exacerbate behavioral issues in our children, especially if they are in this camp of the more spirited child. And before I go on, I just want to talk about this idea of overdiagnosis. Why would I mention this? Well, I'm starting to get concerned that people aren't being helped by some of the rush to diagnosis that we see. I'm not the only one who thinks this, so I've put some resources into the chat to support this idea, because I acknowledge it could be a little bit controversial, and I don't want to upset anybody who has a diagnosis and who has found it helpful. But this is a book, I'll show you, James Davies. Does that show backwards? Anyway, the name of the book and the author is in the chat. It's called Cracked: Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good. This is not a new idea, it's an old idea. When I was studying back in the 90s, we were introduced to a Hungarian psychiatrist called Thomas Szasz. James Davies is British, but Thomas Szasz wrote a book, very influential book, called The Myth of Mental Illness. And in it, he argued that many mental disorders are more accurately really reactions to life circumstances and shouldn't be understood as true medical conditions. So I want to emphasize that temperament is by no means a disorder. It's the way a child interacts with the world, though I do believe that misunderstood, it can lead all the way into, for want of a better expression, true disorders, though sometimes I think children get disorders, and perhaps it would be better to frame what they need to understand in terms of temperament rather than disorder. But I do know as well that sometimes you need that label in order to get the support. So that's an issue. But we want to be wary of pathologizing. So before we move on to the 9 temperamental traits, I want to talk about how they link with adult personality. So these are the big 5 personality traits that are usually used to describe adult personality. You see there we have openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Not a very popular word nowadays, but it is the opposite of emotional stability. So some people tend to experience more negative feelings than others, and other people are much more emotionally stable. They find it easier to develop emotional resilience. So I've made extraversion bigger there because Mary Sheedy Kurcinka, in her book, Raising Your Spirited Child, she also kept introversion, extraversion separately. And she suggests it's a very helpful idea that parents figure out where they land on that continuum. Probably you already know where you are, although there's no doubt that we can moderate and modify as we get older. Also, we can learn how to come more into balance, learn the skills of our opposing valence. But if you have a mismatch, the reason why I'm mentioning it is because if you have a mismatch between parent and child, that can present some real challenges. So for instance, an extroverted child with an introverted parent, which is the pattern I have with one of my children, that was incredibly difficult. So the introverts of the world need to recharge and reboot by pulling away from people and going onto their own solitude, calm, quiet. Whereas the extroverts of the world literally recharge and draw energy from being around other people. Now, of course, everybody is wired for connection, but this is so true of the extroverts. And so an extroverted child can really drain an introverted parent. So the onus, I think, is on the adult. I felt like the onus was on me to make sure that I was meeting my need for recharging separately from the time when I would be with my daughter. Though not always, obviously, I'm here to say that an extroverted child can learn to leave an introverted parent alone for 5 minutes while they recharge, if you understand that is what's going on, and you can learn to be open about it. So they're the big 5. The 9 temperamental traits, we're going to come to those now, and I'll explain how they map onto the adult 5. The simplest way I think of thinking about it is the 9 traits are measurable at birth, and over childhood, they evolve and reduce, map onto these 5. But if you've got a particular cluster of tendencies as a child, we can predict with a fairly good degree of certainty that you are going to end up loading on one end or the other of the adult big 5 continuum. So here we go. Let me show you this book as well, Mary Sheedy Kurcinka. My book, my version, there's a newer version as well, but my version is incredibly well thumbed. You can see it's falling apart here. I found it so helpful. I highly recommend that anybody go and find the she has a questionnaire in this. And again, this is not a diagnostic category for anything that you can slice the brain and measure, but it's a very helpful lens or metaphor with which to understand yourself and your children. I certainly felt incredibly well met and well seen just by reading this book, and my whole body relaxed when I realized that there wasn't anything wrong with my children. They were just spirited, as she describes them, which is a much nicer way of describing these children rather than the maybe more difficult type of label that they would have been given in the past. So intensity maps onto neuroticism in the big 5. This is the energy level of a child's emotional responses. So children who have intense reactions have strong emotions, whether positive or negative. Some people react much more mildly. So basically the spirited child is, these are the children that have the intense positive and negative emotions. The mild reactors, they're the people who quite like jumping out of airplanes, parachute jumps. They're the people who find that careers like accident and emergency, emergency room doctor, emergency room nurse, they quite enjoy the high intensity environment because their personality or temperament is much more emotionally stable. Whereas for somebody who leans in the other direction, that is overwhelmed straight away, much too much, it's not going to happen. And I remember the first clue that I had an intense child was when my son, oh my goodness, counting age in months rather than years, and he would wake bawling, crying so loud, so intense that he immediately sent myself and my husband into dysregulation, though of course we would try very hard to hide it. And we discovered quite quickly that the minute you put the first mouthful of porridge into him, he started to calm down, but it never stopped the distress and the intensity with which he expressed that every morning when he awoke. So intensity is awe-inspiring when you're watching it. When spirited kids are happy, experiencing joy, excitement, love, those things, they're great fun to watch. There's never a dull moment, is how we put it in our house around intensity. But the flip side, of course, is that when they're experiencing the negative emotions, the strong negative reactions, they can easily overwhelm themselves or others. And this can lead to the kinds of conflicts that are very difficult to manage in family life. It's really important to recognize and validate a child's intense feelings, help them to understand that this is how they are. But from personal experience, validating intense children is not enough. I often, my clients, as you can imagine, are very often parents who come to me and realize that they have these spirited children. That's why they end up seeking help. And they have often tried to recognize and validate a child with intense negative emotions until they are absolutely floored and have no energy left to do so. Validation alone won't work for intense children. They need boundaries. Sensible strategies like name it to tame it from the brilliant Dan Siegel, who I have an awful lot of time for, doesn't work as well with this child. You need to put the boundaries in, learn how to gently but authoritatively let them know that you are in charge and it's time now to stop. Otherwise, they will just end up being slave to their own negative feelings. So they need to learn that they can gradually emotionally regulate. It's not an overnight journey. It happens gradually. We're not talking about suppressing feelings. Sometimes my daughter would say to me, "You're trying to make me something I'm not." But I would say to her, "No, I'm not." But it's very important that you learn how to manage this in ways that are respectful to the people that you share the world with. So, she was the type of child that when upset, things could get quite out of hand until she learned to manage that. And it was a slow and steady journey. I'm happy to report that she's now a reasonably well-adjusted 18-year-old. So the talk next month, I'll be talking much more about these kinds of disciplinary strategies. But the big thing I suppose I want to say is that children can learn this. Children with intense feelings can learn this. And I think it's wonderful when we hold out the hope and the optimism that they can learn to manage their intense feelings. So now we have persistence. Persistence maps onto conscientiousness in the big five. This is how long a child can stay focused on a task. And also when they encounter obstacles, how much persistence they will bring to surmounting that obstacle. So some children have a very long attention span and others will give up more easily. I show this picture here of the spirit, by the way. Spirit leans towards being incredibly persistent. They're extraordinarily determined young people, these spirited children. When they set their minds on something, they will keep going until they get what they want, whether that's more screen time, the toy that they want, the thing from their sibling, the meal that they prefer. And this is a kind of relentlessness, which can once again also wipe out parents. And if that persistence is coupled with the intensity of the previous trait that we're talking about, that is what leads to those awe-inspiring tantrums that are very often when new clients come to me. So in a positive light, of course, persistence is a trait that we very much admire in adults. It makes people tenacious, committed. It's a key predictor of academic and career success in life. But with young people, young adolescents, young children, this is what often looks like rigidity and defiance. And actually, it can become actual rigidity and defiance. I think it's very important with parents to, when a child is young enough, to help realize that if you meet more of the needs in a timely fashion, then the child who is particularly persistent will be better disposed to cooperate with you. Also, if you help them learn that they can be flexible. So flexibility is the big thing that persistent children need to learn. They need to hear that they can learn this and that sometimes they will be required to, because a family is a whole group of people whose needs all matter. And I sometimes like to think of family life as a constant triage, whose needs are on top in this moment. And so very persistent children, it's a wonderful trait when managed well and when you learn to harness it and work with your child rather than, clobber them over the head with it. So offering choice is one of the ways we can do this, although I know that my daughter had no time whatsoever for what I call false choices. So I don't know if anybody's read any of these kinds of parenting books that suggest you can say to children, would you like the yellow cup or the red cup, as a way of increasing that sense of autonomy over their own life that children who are very persistent and can lock in easily tend to enjoy. But my daughter was never having any of it. If I offered the yellow plate or the red plate, she'd say, I want the blue plate, so I'm aware that that kind of thing can happen. And of course, if you offer those sorts of choice, you're also at risk of setting up a pattern of constant negotiation. So negotiation and the back and forth problem solving between strategies, needs, how can we meet as many needs as possible for as many family members as possible? That is a wonderful way of managing family life. But I found that in reality, it's not always going to work because, school starts at a particular time and trains leave at exact times and airplanes leave at exact times. And sometimes as a parent, you have a dozen things in your head and your child isn't aware of any of those things. So you're triaging the needs for all the family members, whereas the child is focused on their need. So I'm certainly in the camp that thinks that persistent children can learn, if handled in a gentle and set up for success sort of way. They will reach a point where they will cooperate with you, even if it's begrudging. Because you have worked with them enough in other scenarios to let them know that their needs won't always be trumped by yours, but at the same time, you require their flexibility on occasion. And when you decide something's going to happen, they need to learn to trust you and roll with it sometimes. So that's persistence. Sensitivity. I've put these little asterisks here beside some of the temperamental traits. What the asterisks mean is that these are measurable from really early after birth, so infancy. If anybody is a nurse in the room, you'll know that one of the things you do with a baby when they're first born is check the reflex by rubbing the finger along the bottom of the foot for the Moro reflex to see if the toes curl. And some children require only the lightest feather touch to elicit that response. And some children need you to apply much more pressure to get that response. So sensitivity sometimes called the threshold of responsiveness, is the level of stimulus that's needed to evoke a response from a child. So low threshold children react quickly to stimuli, and high and that can be physical stimuli like lights or smells or noises, textures, all impact them much more so than children who have a higher threshold and need much more of a stimulus to elicit the response. So when I heard this, I thought, that's interesting, because I hear it all the time in the rooms of 12-step recovery, that in childhood, many people who end up struggling with addiction issues and find their way into recovery were told that they were too sensitive as children. So sensitivity also, you'll see there, I've said it maps onto neuroticism, that we observe children who are very sensitive as infants and youngsters often become adults who lean more towards experiencing negative mood. Again, sensitivity has its benefits. So people who are highly sensitive can be very empathic, very in tune with their environment. They pick up on lots of things that other people wouldn't notice. They can be very highly compassionate. On the other hand, they are prone to sensory overload, to meltdown in situations which are too stimulating. And again, an awful lot of my clients would have children that are in this camp. So the spirited child is more sensitive. And let me tell you as well how this used to play out in my home. So I'm very fortunate to live very close to London, only a short train ride away. So sometimes I would decide, as a nice journey, a nice treat, I'd take my children up to one of the wonderful museums and galleries that are in London. But by the time I've gathered them together, got on the train, got up to London, walked from the train station to the gallery, got to the gallery, all they want to do is go to the cafe and eat. And then once we've eaten in the cafe, they are totally sensorily overloaded and they want to go home. And I tell you how difficult that was for me, because I have an inner child that I call my deprived child. And she doesn't like to waste anything. Deprived child, which she's partly me. She's also partly, if you subscribe to this idea of sort of generational trauma. So my parents were born at the very end of the Second World War in Ireland. And it was incredibly, rationing was still going on. It was incredibly important not to waste anything. So I inherited, or I was born into a family environment where that kind of not waste not, want not was very important. So my inner deprived child, she would be tempted to press on and keep my children in the gallery until the point where we might have massive meltdowns in the gallery. So I developed a strategy that I call quit while you're ahead. And so deprived child would need reassurance that it was actually okay to have spent the money to come up, to buy the ticket, to pay for the train fares, to go to the cafe, and then to turn around and head straight back home again after spending maybe 10 minutes just in the gallery. And it's worth saying as well that any child that has experienced a lot of adverse childhood events, maybe particular large T traumas, or just multiple small T traumas, any of their temperamental traits can be exacerbated by trauma. And so the nervous system of a highly sensitive child can be on very high alert, perceive threats where there aren't any. So you're going to have to work hard to help these children learn to regulate their nervous system, providing calm environments. So I encourage clients to think that the galleries and the cinema and the day trips can wait. It won't be forever. The nervous system can be regulated, and we learn about using water to regulate it, baths, running your hands underwater as a shortcut if there's no time to take a bath. Classical music is also very good. And I bet if there are parents there in the room who have sensitive child, they'll know, because you've probably had to cut all the labels out of all the clothes and spend your time, maybe spend more time than you like, arguing with children about why a onesie is not suitable clothing for maybe granny's 70th birthday party. So again, I'm here to tell you that a child who is highly sensitive, when their needs are being met in other areas, they can learn that they can tolerate the feelings for a short amount of time. And again, you keep that cooperation and desire to contribute to you. All children have a need to contribute to their parents. We all have a need to contribute to everybody, but children in particular love to contribute to their parents if they are having their needs met in other areas. So we practiced something in our house called consensus shopping. So nobody would be forced to buy any clothes and wear any clothes that they absolutely hated, but nor would I be forced to buy things that I absolutely hated. And we had what we would talk about, you know, when granny's taking you for lunch, you can't wear your onesie, and that's just it. So that's sensitivity. Now we have perceptiveness. Perceptiveness is sometimes called distractibility. It being highly perceptive maps negatively onto conscientiousness. So children who are highly distractible have a difficult time becoming conscientious as adults. Now, the plus side to this, particularly in the younger ages, is so under 2.5, one of the only discipline techniques you need with children that are that young is to distract them. So to draw their attention away from whatever it is that you don't want them to pay attention to or put their fingers in, and direct them to something else that's interesting and can hold their attention. This is easy with children who are highly perceptive and distractible, not so easy with children who can be persistent and less distractible. So the distractibility or low distractibility is that sustained focus. Plus sides are that children are very aware of their surroundings, they're highly observant, highly insightful. It often is accompanied by a keen sense of justice. But the challenge, of course, is when it gets scattered and distracted. And you'll spot as well that children who are more perceptive, these are the children who can pick up on emotional states in the family more so than others. And that means that they can pick up on things that they aren't necessarily quite ready to emotionally process. Nevertheless, if a child is picking it up, you need to roll with that sort of aspect to their temperament and help them learn how to process it in a very age-appropriate way, because if we don't, they will have increased anxiety. What do children who are highly perceptive need to learn? Well, they need to learn how to focus on what's important and manage their distractions. They're helped by breaking tasks down into small, manageable chunks. They're helped by being given instructions one at a time rather than big lists of it. You have to be very clear and concise in your language and give them explanations about what's happening around them. These children also will benefit from learning grounding techniques early in life, so like breathing and putting their feet flat on the ground. And these things will help them stay in the moment when their minds wander. Now, adaptability. This maps onto agreeableness and openness. So adaptability is how easy a child adjusts to new environments. I picked this slide. I think this is lovely because I'm sure many of us know that song, It's My Party, and I'll cry if I want to. So my daughter finds adapting to new environments quite tricky. She's also intense and persistent and sensitive. So birthday parties, her own especially, were incredibly difficult. So we used to have to set those up very carefully for success. Whereas highly adaptable children can quickly adjust to new routines, new experiences. These are the children for whom a new school or a new home, while it's always a big deal to move school for a child, they adjust more quickly than the children who are slower to adapt. So it's the slow to adapt that's considered to be the component of spirit. If you have this type of child, you will know that they like to know what's coming. So my daughter would start every morning coming into our room with the question, what are we doing today? And they feel less comfortable with change, and transitions can be very difficult. I thought I might tell a story. How am I doing for time? I'm okay. I'm going to tell you the story of a new inner child I found only recently. So I've been in recovery, as I say, for 16 years, but I was speaking with my sponsor recently, and she said to me, she said, sounds like there might be an inner child there that I didn't know, she meant. And sure enough, within a few weeks of her telling me about that, I found her. So when I was 12 years of age, I was a girl, a ballet girl. I used to like ballet, and I did ballet classes. And I grew up in Dublin, and the London Royal Ballet School came to Dublin one year to do some auditions. And this was a big deal for Dublin, actually, and for the ballet schools in Dublin. And there was no consultation. Remember, this was, so this would have been the early 80s. And there was no consultation with children in those days. Adults made all the decisions for children. So my ballet teacher and mother decided that I would be sent as the representative of my ballet school to this audition. That was all the information I was given. I didn't think to ask any questions. I'm not sure that I got satisfactory answers anyway. So I arrived on the day of the audition, and I was terrified. And I was in the changing room. My mom was with me. All the other girls were there. Some of my fears were, for example, I was afraid of not getting it. I was afraid of getting a place. And I was 12 years of age, and I was starting to be very body conscious. And while I was comfortable being in my ballet gear in front of my own teacher and my own ballet friends and classmates, I wasn't comfortable with being in leotard and tights in front of strangers. But again, could not articulate any of that. And to top it all off, I am very slow to adapt. So even today, I'm the person that gets in the car when we're driving to go somewhere nice for a walk. And when we get there, I have to gather myself in order to get out of the car, because I've got really quite comfortable in the car and I don't necessarily want to get out at all. Anyway, back to me in the changing room. The class is about to begin, and I cannot bring myself to go in. I don't have nearly enough information. The fear is overwhelming. I'm absolutely petrified. I'm an intense person as well. And I couldn't bring myself to go in. And long story short, that part of me has been in that dressing room for 40 years, until only a few weeks ago when I finally found her and opened a channel of communication to her. And it's proving very fruitful. She's still wary, and she's not convinced. She's not convinced yet, but she's considering whether or not she's going to let me be fully in charge instead of letting herself be felt in that kind of frozen fear type of way that she can when I get particularly concerned about something new. So, regularity, sometimes called rhythmicity. This is also measurable from birth. We can see some children's biological functions, such as sleep, hunger, elimination. These are very regular. I love the movie Mary Poppins as a child, and Mr. Banks, that song where Mr. Banks, Sherry and Piper due at 6:02, and then he at 6:00 whatever, he pats his children on the head and sends them off to bed. Ah, lordly is the life he leads. So the people you can set your clock by are the people who are regular. Yeah, and setting up routines for regular kids and by regular adults is great. This was one of my big bugbears with a lot of the parenting information that I found out there. So routine, 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 routine. I am one of the most irregular people that I know. I am the person that likes to sit in a new seat after lunchtime at the work event when we're all sitting around in a circle. I eat at different times, I sleep at different times, I wake at different times. There's no changing it. It seems to just be how I am. And the spirited children this is the irregularity. And when I read parenting advice that says set up routines, I used to in the past just roll my eyes because it was completely beyond me to set up regular routines with any ease. And of course, ease is one of the great needs that we have in life. We all need greater ease. Though I did eventually learn that if I put in the effort to put predictable, regular schedules in place, then we would all benefit, because weirdly and counterintuitively, children who are highly irregular do benefit from an amount of routine, and at the same time, they need flexibility within that. So, for instance, career choice in adults, some people who are highly irregular simply would be, destroyed by the 9 to 5 week in, week out, year in, year out type of work. So if you're an irregular person, then you will enjoy a job that allows you to have more change in your life. Activity level. Activity level maps onto extraversion. This is measurable easily from birth. And it's the amount of physical movement a child typically engages in. So high activity children, always on the move, won't sit still. Low activity children, much more sedentary. These are the children who can sit for hours coloring in. Yeah. Spirited children are often, but not always, highly energetic. And they need to learn that they can calm down, that they need calm activities, though they also need plenty of opportunity for physical play, plenty of opportunity to release their energy. I sometimes with clients, if they come in, one of the things I immediately check for is if we're dealing with a child with a very high activity level, then I know that they are going to predictably have a much higher need for fun and play. And so they need to learn to channel their energy in productive ways, of course, and recognize when it's time to slow down. Other sticking points, children have a high activity level can sometimes get wound up again at nighttime when they need to sleep, but they can easily revert to their high activity level. So they need to learn the skill of winding down. Perhaps a child who has a high activity level would enjoy, things like foot massages that accompany a bedtime story to help them to learn to balance their need for play with the quiet, focused activities, help them to manage themselves more effectively. Now, approach, this is the second last one, folks. So approach or withdrawal, approach or avoid. Again, measurable from very soon after birth. This is how a child responds to new situations or new people. Approach-oriented children eagerly engage with all of the new experiences, whereas withdrawal-oriented children are much more cautious, much shyer. Now, spirited children tend to vary more on this. So if I speak of my family, so I am highly spirited, but I avoid new situations. So I lean shy, whereas my spirited daughter, also intense and persistent, but she leans approach, even though she's also slow to adapt and transition. So can be complex, which is why I recommend getting the book and having a look in depth at your own personal profile. So if you're a child who's more cautious, this again is another thing that a lot of my clients, they often come to me. We're very big in the UK on getting children learning to swim very young. So I would often get parents calling me wondering whether or not they should abandon the attempts to get their cautious child to swim now or whether they can wait till next year. So again, we talk that through. It can vary from child to child. Sometimes they just need gentle encouragement, reassurance. Maybe they need the first session to be sitting by the pool before they go back the following week, or maybe it's better, maybe it would be better to just wait until next term if you've got a child who's super cautious. I remember one time bringing a bunch of children for kayaking, and I knew one of them was going to be slow to warm up and avoid this new situation of kayaking. So we decided we'd set it up for success, spoke to him beforehand, arrived in plenty of time, explained how it was all going to work, gave him, lots and lots and lots of time to warm up. But, there's only so much you can do. And we couldn't arrive an hour before or go the week before as well. And we had two new things going on. So there was a new activity, which was to do with water, and there were new people. So it was a bit of a triple whammy, really, for this child. And so he became the child that sat on the edge while the other big bunch of children went off kayaking. So that is definitely a hard thing to have happen. But, it's not the end of the world. And I drew back beside him and talked about what it feels like to not be able to join in. And this is one of the joys, is that you can help a child like that understand that it's not that there's anything wrong with the child. Child hasn't been rejected by the other children. We don't need to develop a story that goes, those children are mean, or there's something wrong with me. It means that I'm a child who likes to be more cautious around new situations, and I'll have a go next time. Maybe we'll come back next week or next month or next year, and we'll try again. Finally, Tiggers and Eeyores, mood. I think everybody probably knows some Tiggers and Eeyores. The spirited children are the ones that lean negative mood. And again, how often do we hear it in the rooms, that people in the rooms feel like they're set negative? And they're probably right. They're probably people who are set to experience more negative mood. Now, the plus side of negative mood, sometimes Mary Sheedy, Kurcinka, she calls it analytical. It's a fantastic skill for critiquing people, for becoming an academic. Take your critiquing negative mood friend to look at the house that you're thinking of buying, because they'll notice all the problems with it and save you from buying a house that would be a problem. On the other hand, it can be quite draining. And so all children who lean in this direction need to learn that they can be more positive, that while you're not going to change your set point, you're not going to turn an Eeyore into a Tigger. You can learn, and this is what's so wonderful about 12-step recovery, you can learn through practices like gratitude, that and writing gratitude lists, that you can move the dial a little bit, and also you can learn to focus on what's positive in your life. The other big thing that children who have this orientation need to learn is that moods pass. So even though they may experience more negative mood, all moods pass. So it's that wonderful 12-step wisdom that this too shall pass. So maybe they're having a particularly bad mood at the moment, but it will pass and they'll feel better in time. So just to sum up, I think it's really important that we take temperament into account in all interactions with our children. Temperament and particular spirited temperament is not just weakness or challenge, it's also strength. Being a trauma-informed parent is about recognizing when children have been poorly supported in their early years, maybe, and giving them extra support in managing intense emotions or sensory sensitivities or difficulties with adapting. All behavior is communication. Spirited children are not being difficult on purpose. We can manage temperament really well, and maybe even help children to avoid diagnoses and trauma if we equip ourselves, and of course work on our own emotional regulation, supporting our own maturing through recovery, if that's what you're doing. So yes, trauma can be healed. I don't think that can be said enough. It's absolutely a positive news story. No matter what's gone on in your past, your history is not your destiny. Your personality may be set, but skills can be learned at any time and feelings can be processed. Thank you very much for listening today. And now I think we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Samantha. Another outstanding. Hold on, let me see. Yeah, there it is. Another outstanding presentation. Really, truly, the work you put into it is so obvious, and so grateful for that.